The UFC heads back to Abu Dhabi this weekend as they look to showcase their yearly card, which is a pay-per-view, and once again headlined by Islam Makhachev. Earlier this week, we had some drama as Alexander Volkanovski was stepping in for the injured Charles Oliveira, and now we get a rematch of a fight that took place back in February. That night, Makhachev came up on top. Let's see if Volkanovski can go out there and even up the score if he's able to pick up a victory this weekend. On the co-main event side of things, we got Chimaev taking on short notice replacement Kamaru Usman in likely a fight that will be the toughest of Chimaev's career to date. If you're wondering where I found footage for all of these fighters and the footage that you're about to see, make sure you check out the MMA Fight Archive, link in the description below. 7-day free trial to ensure that you leave no stone unturned when you're doing all your researching for these upcoming events. We got direct links to past fights for all these fighters competing on upcoming cards, not just for the UFC, but for promotions like Bellator, PFL, LFA, CFFC, Cage Warriors, KSW, ACA, Invicta, Fury FC, 2,500 fighter profiles available for you to research through. Check it out if you'd like. 7-day free trial, like I said, link for that is in the description below. Also, if you're looking for full in-depth breakdowns, make sure you guys check out the full MMA Logcast episode that I dropped earlier this week. All right, hope you're laced up and ready to go because we're off and running with the first fight of the night between Magomedov and Bruno Silva. Magomedov has a highly anticipated UFC debut ahead of him this weekend, as the physique that he brings to the table with that one dead eye that he has and just the rugged look that he brings to the table. He's 11-0 and utilizes a mobile kicking game to damage his opponents from distance and eventually finish them later on. He has 10 of his 11 wins by knockout, although I expect him to go out there and utilize a safer approach here against the heavy-hitting power of Bruno Silva. Bruno Silva has had a roller coaster run in the UFC thus far, but I expect him to go out there and take in another L this weekend, as Magomedov should be able to use his speed, distance management, and kicks to touch up Silva from distance and really put the damage on him, winning this fight by decision. Next up, we got Victoria Dudakova going up against Jinyu Frey. Dudakova had an unfortunate UFC debut where she won her fight in 30-ish seconds when she utilized a trip or a throw that caused Estela Nunes to dislocate her elbow. Dudakova is a very strong wrestler and very young at 24 years old, and I'm expecting her to go out there and completely outwork the 38-year-old Jinyu Frey. I expect Dudakova to land the better takedowns, land the better striking, and have more left in the gas tank when this fight gets into deep waters, allowing her to win this fight by decision. Next up, we go to Nathaniel Wood going up against Mohamed Naimov. Wood is now 3-0 since moving up to featherweight, which is a weight class he probably should have been fighting at the entire time. He can still go out there, utilize his speed, touching up his opponents, and then ensuring that he has a good enough durability and chin to take some big shots so that he can continue moving forward and putting the pressure on his opponents. Naimov made his UFC debut earlier this year where he pulled off an upset victory over Jamie Mullarkey, but Naimov is not a big hitter as a lot of people are trying to take from that fight. He's finished 4 of his 9 victories, but he normally looks to go out there and grind his opponents out with his grappling. I'm expecting Wood to stuff the takedowns and utilize his speed and his fight IQ to touch up Naimov over 15 minutes, maybe even mixing in some takedowns of his own to make it look good enough for the judges and for him to get his hand raised by decision. Next up, we got Mike Breeden taking on Anshul Jubli. Breeden is on a very tough 3-fight losing streak, but he's taking on a stiff test here in Anshul Jubli, who won the Road to UFC tournament earlier this year with a beautiful grappling display against Jeka Sergey, where he was able to get the finish in the second round. He's a solid striker with some good range management, but also a solid enough jiu-jitsu game that he can go out there and stifle his opponents on the mat. I don't agree with Jubli with being such a giant favorite in this matchup, but I believe he is more well-rounded than Breeden, and even though Breeden might be the better experienced fighter here, I think Jubli has too many tools that Breeden will not be able to overcome. Give me Jubli and Jubli by decision. Next up, we got the return of Abu Azaitar going up against Cedriques Dumas. Azaitar has been a part of the UFC roster since July 2018 and has only competed twice. Last time we saw him in the cage, he lost in the last seconds of his fight against Marc-Andre Barriault, showcasing that this guy has a cardio issue. He has some big power in his hands, and he normally looks to march his opponents down and throw big strikes. His opponent Dumas is 1-1 in the UFC after losing his UFC debut as a big favorite against Josh Fremd. After that, he was able to pull off a decision victory against Cody Brundage, utilizing his control time in his wrestling, which is something he was known for on the regional scene. A lot of his striking game is with his kicks, and I expect him to utilize that distance management, speed, and kicking game to keep Azaitar at the end of his punches, at the end of his range, until he can eventually get this fight to the ground, grinding on Azaitar and eventually getting a late finish. Next up, we got Javid Basharat going up against Victor Henry. Basharat is a 14-0 hot prospect. His striking game is elite. His ability to pull his opponents into his counters so that he can damage them significantly and make it look good enough for the judges. His defensive wrestling has allowed him to keep fights upright where he is most at an advantage over his opponents. Henry is now 2-1 with the promotion, and he had a solid performance against Tony Gravely last time around, but it was a very close fight that he still managed to get his hand raised by decision. I believe it was a split as well. He's very experienced, like I said, has a solid wrestling game, but also does well in terms of pressuring his opponents by moving forward and trying to land strikes. However, I believe Basharat will be able to take advantage of that type of style, showcasing what Rafael Assunção was able to do against Henry, and we should see Basharat go out there, land the better strikes, and win this fight by decision. Next up, we got the UFC debut of Mohamed Yahya going up against Trevor Peek. This is a fight where Yahya comes in as the current UAE Warriors lightweight champion. There's nothing really special about the kid. He is quite hittable and he has some decent power of his own, and it looks like he tries to utilize grapple heavy approaches late in fights. That's going to be tough for him to pull off against a guy in Trevor Peek who doesn't often settle for bad positions. Even if he gets taken down, he is quickly working back to his feet so that he can go out there and just show off his slugfest type approach that he normally employs in his fights. I'm expecting Trevor Peek to bounce back from that loss that he took at the hands of Chepe Mariscal earlier this year, and I expect him to stop the takedowns and start taking over later on in this matchup where he can eventually find a knockout over Mohamed Yahya. Next up, we got a very interesting flyweight matchup here between Tim Elliott against Mohamed Mokaev. Starting off on the Elliott side, who's riding a 2-fight winning streak, he was able to go out there and outwork Victor Altamirano over 50 minutes and get his hand raised by decision. On the flip side for Mokaev, he extended his flawless record to 9-0 earlier this year with a late finish over Jafel Filio. He is a relentless wrestler who can put on solid cardio and solid pace against his opponents, taking over in the latter half of fights and outgrinding and outworking his opponents. Although Elliott is too big of an underdog in my opinion here, I still believe that Mokaev can go out there and stay a step ahead of Elliott and dominate this fight with his grappling approach. So give me Mokaev and Mokaev by decision. Next up, we got Said Nurmagomedov going up against Muin Gafurov. Nurmagomedov picked up his second UFC loss earlier this year against Jonathan Martinez in a closely contested fight that Martinez ended up getting his hand raised in. That continues to showcase why Nurmagomedov is tough to trust as a chalky favorite, as he usually has a low volume approach and is highly reliant on finishes to get his hand raised. Gafurov was unable to secure a victory in his UFC debut earlier this year when he was outworked and outpointed by John Castaneda. However, I feel that the activity level and potential takedown success of Gafurov could allow him to look like the busier and more active fighter here against Nurmagomedov. Gafurov has yet to be finished in his career, and I believe that will allow him to go out there, showcase good enough durability, showcase good enough submission defense that he can put together a better body of work to go out there and outwork Nurmagomedov. Next up, we got Ikram Aliskerov going up against Warley Alves. Aliskerov's only loss comes at the hands of Khamzat Chimaev, but he's shown a pretty flawless record up until that point. He's very solid with his wrestling and his ability to take his opponents to the ground and dominate from that top position. His striking is coming along very well, as we saw in his UFC debut when he knocked out Phil Haas. Alves, on the other hand, is on a 2-fight losing streak. Alves took off 2022 to deal with an ACL injury, and it feels like that could be affecting him, considering he usually utilizes a power striking approach and heavy leg kicks. I expect Aliskerov to weather the early storm of Alves, put on a pace on him, and eventually get a late finish here. Next up, we got a pivotal light heavyweight matchup between Magomed Ankalaev and Johnny Walker. Ankalaev last time around came up short in his journey to become a light heavyweight champion as he fought to a draw against Jan Blachowicz last December. I still believe that Ankalaev is one of the best, if not the best light heavyweight on the planet, considering his proficiency in the striking and grappling realms. He's very disciplined with his striking, making use of his low volume striking approach by ensuring that every strike that he throws out there impacts this matchup significantly. Otherwise, he looks to take opponents to the ground and grind them out from that top position. Johnny Walker is a fighter who is now on a 3-fight winning streak and learning to utilize his physical advantages to the best of his abilities. However, I believe the run that he's currently on is against lower level of competition, and he's probably in for a rude awakening now fighting the top of the division in Ankalaev. Look for Ankalaev to utilize his counter striking to eventually set up his takedowns, where he should be able to grind on Johnny Walker and end up getting his hand raised by decision. Moving over to the co-main event, we got short notice replacement here. Kamaru Usman going up against Khamzat Chimaev. Usman has lost back-to-back fights now against Leon Edwards, but Usman at his best is a guy that puts on a very tough pace that a lot of opponents are unable to keep up with, bolstered by his wrestling and his improving striking game. When we saw Chimaev fight the top of the division in Gilbert Burns, we saw him face adversity. And credit to him, he was able to overcome that adversity and still end up getting his hand raised. However, in this matchup against Usman, he's going to be fighting somebody who can stop the takedowns and stay competitive in the grappling realm. With it coming down to the striking game, I feel like Usman could have an advantage there as long as his durability holds up and as long as he doesn't really show the wear and tear of what a 36-year-old would bring to the table. So at plus 250 and as a solid underdog here, it's not often you get a fighter of the caliber of Kamaru Usman at these numbers. I feel like he's a shot that needs to be taken here, and I think he could win this fight by decision. And that brings us to our main event, which is a rematch for the lightweight title between Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski. I'm expecting Makhachev to go out there and showcase a strong wrestling game plan like he has in pretty much all of his fights early, but I expect the resistance and Volkanovski's skill set to provide as much of a deterrent as it did in the first matchup, which should allow Volkanovski to start pulling away late. Even though he's taking this fight on short notice, he is a fighter that strikes me as somebody that will make the most of this opportunity and still showcase that he has a good enough gas tank and good enough technical skills to go out there and do what he could not do the last time around. Look for Volkanovski to start taking over in rounds 3, 4, and 5 and picking up a decision victory, dethroning the lightweight champion Islam Makhachev. There you guys go. Breakdowns on all 13 fights for this UFC 294 card. Make sure you guys check out the rest of the content that I got for you guys this week. We got the top 3 lock of the night candidates, top 3 dog of the night candidates, a free parlay, as well as the 3 best prop bets dropping for you guys tomorrow. Good luck on all your action this week, folks, and I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Peace.